My name is Richard Hogg. I'm the CEO of Jackson Hogg, and I'm delighted to be here today with Jonathan O'Halloran, CEO and co-founder of QuantumDX, a diagnostic business based in Newcastle upon Tyne. QuantumDX has some fantastic technology which is helping with rapid detection of infectious diseases globally. So Jonathan, tell me, where did the journey all begin?
Oh, well, the journey began, was it 13 years ago? In my garage in a small townhouse in Sussex. It's been quite a ride.
Okay, so home for you outside the region, Jonathan, or?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Germany. My dad's in the forces, and came back to the UK when I was 13, and moved back to Sussex, and so that's where it all started for me.
Okay, so how do you go from being out the area to this startup with QuantumDX? Where did the love of genetics begin?
Well, it started at school.
Okay.
Yeah, I fell in love with genetics during my A-levels. And then I did it for my graduate degree, then my postgrad degree. It took me to America and then to Singapore. And then we started this company up and immediately got funding from the South African government. And so we all moved to Cape Town.
Okay. What about the football career, Jonathan?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was an illustrious career up until I was 13, I think.
Yeah.
I played for a team called Paderborn in Germany in the youth system. And Paderborn now in the Bundesliga, but they weren't when I was playing for them.
Wow. So across into Cape Town, you found a love of genetics. Why did you realize that you had a love of that subject?
Well, I'm colorblind, I'm tone deaf, and I'm dyslexic. So a career in the arts was never on the cards for me. And I really wanted to understand why I had all of these perceived failings. And so genetics was the answer to all of that.
Okay. It's interesting. Perceived failures can often be seen as a real advantage. Do you feel as though...
Yeah, of course. I mean, I see the world in a different way to everybody else, both in color and how I go about solving problems.
Brilliant. So you've now moved to Cape Town. Has the idea for QuantumDX actually come along yet, or have you just started to...
QuantumDX had been around for a year before we moved to Cape Town. It existed in my garage, when I was playing around with different technologies and chemistries and trying to get things to work. And that's where we got enough data to support the investment from the government. And then, we moved down to Cape Town. We've got a wonderful laboratory in Tygerberg Hospital, which is right in the epicenter of where drug-resistant tuberculosis first started. And that's really where I fell in love with diagnosing TB, because it's such a difficult disease to diagnose, and the variance of the genetic sequence is so much. It's an incredible disease. And that really honed the specifications for QPOC. We wanted it to address testing of tuberculosis in the field, because we saw a clear problem where patients in townships such as Khayelitsha outside of Cape Town were given the samples, and they were having to then take that into the laboratories to be tested. And sometimes with culture, it takes months. So we wanted to short circuit all of that and give these people a test for pathogen ID initially, followed by a drug resistance screen, all in a single cartridge. And that's really where QPOC developed.
Yeah. Often people don't talk about this, but when you're actually in the developing world, what is it like to see firsthand the challenges of what people are experiencing with infectious disease? Yeah,
it's interesting because when you first go there, you're initially shocked because there's a culture change, but you start to see it as quite normal and usual, and it's at that moment that you get horrified because it's become normalized to you, and you see that these people actually they have very little, they're living very close together. Any infectious diseases will wipe through the communities, and they don't have access to the level of diagnostic and medical care that we do here. Now, in South Africa, it's slightly different because they are very well advanced with the way in which they treat tuberculosis and that sort of thing. But when you start extrapolating that out to other nations that aren't as sophisticated, it really is a massive concern. Mm-hmm. And so that for me, it was very clear what we wanted to do. And that was to provide nations like that an ability to provide the the level of medical care through diagnostics that Western nations are able to do, but without having to invest in the infrastructure, the skilled workers, the laboratories and all that sort of thing. Just technology leap with a small box that they can take out to the people and get them tested.
When you were meeting these people, did you genuinely believe that you could solve this problem, or did it just feel like a bit of a, let's hope that we can develop tech? Or
people ask me that all the time. Like, how do you? Because I mean, all through my career, people have been telling me I'm absolutely nuts and I'll never be able to build the QPOC. Well, I built the QPOC, and it's done now. So slightly, people see it as arrogance, but it's not. It's not arrogance. It's just I just had a belief that by working through the problems one by one, we'll be able to get there. And we have done. I mean, I like to, it's certainly not all me. The team here has impacted hugely. A lot of people, when they interview me, ask, so what does it feel like to invent the QPOC? I didn't invent the QPOC. I had the initial idea. This team invented the QPOC.
And what would have happened if you didn't go that route of having a new product to, because it was essentially a startup, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But what would a classic, route into genetics have looked like by comparison of you going across to Cape Town?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was, for me, that was never on the cards. I hated academia, and just dreadful. Not for me at all.
I find that fascinating because, for you to develop such a complex product and system, you would often think you need to have come from a more academic route to have had the mental horsepower to do that. But
nah.
Okay. Yeah.
Nah. I argue the other route. I think you get into too much of a blinkered view when you're in academia to think expansively like this. Or we look at all the great inventors, Craig Ventnor, for instance, Jonathan Rosberg, who invented DNA sequencing and that sort of thing. They didn't spend much time in academia at all because they found it stifling. Because you're focusing on this foundation research, which takes years and years and years, and you come out with a paper and it's worked one time, but you struggle to repeat it, and you're judged on papers. Mm-hmm. I want to be judged on my product and how well it performs in the market.
No, completely. So you're in Cape Town, you're working with these people in the developing world. What was it, going more into that kind of first-hand experience when you started testing people there? Were you starting to pull out the data that you needed to, essentially identify how you could add more value? Yeah,
I mean, it's an obvious thing. You speak to your customers, you speak to your patients, you get great insight, and you understand more what is actually required. I look at some of our competitors, and I look at their products, and they've not spent the time in the field. I spent 6.5 years in a pathology lab whilst I was at doing my postgrad. So I know all the shortcomings, all the shortfalls. When QPOC was taken out this year into NHS labs, they loved it. People absolutely loved it because we've put deep thought into how it works, into the GUI, into the flashing lights at the front. So when you're over the side of the lab, you can see it flashing, and when it stops flashing, the test is finished. So little details like that is very usable. Other competitor devices, you could they've thrown it together as an engineering exercise without any thought to the end user. But having spent years out in the field, speaking to people, understanding what's needed, we've been able to create something which we think is really quite disruptive.
How big is the opportunity for a product like QPOC?
Well, let's benchmark it. So one of the big exits that we've seen in this field, the classic one is Cepheid, that's $4 billion. Mm-hmm. We've seen recently Mobidive for $500 million. BioFire $500 million as well. So there are huge exits available. Whilst we're not necessarily entertaining that for us right now, we want to just build this product and build our customer base. I mean, that's really where it can go. And we feel at the price point, the speed, the level of multiplexing of this device is bigger than all of those other technologies that I've just cited. And what can QPOC currently do in terms of its applications and working with the patients? Yeah, so right now we've clearly focusing on SARS-CoV-2. And so we've got a 3-plex assay plus a control, so total 4-plex, using qPCR. And that goes straight from sample to answer in 30 minutes with very high sensitivity, which is been demonstrated through clinical trials that we run with the NHS and other folk. So high quality, rapid PCR testing like you can't see in the market at the moment. The closest competitors in terms of speed and accuracy would be Abbott ID now, but they don't really touch us on sensitivity and specificity. DX, which is an immunoassay, but fantastic immunoassay. Again, not quite there on sensitivity. Everything else will take 2 hours. They claim 90 minutes, but generally it takes 2 hours. The difference between 2 hours and 30 minutes when you're in a triage situation where you've got a patient, and maybe it's an emergency C-section, maybe they need to be treated. We can run this in the ambulance as they're going into the A&E. You can't wait 2 hours for a result.
And the early products with QuantumDX were very much targeted at the developing world. Am I right in assuming that this could be used universally across a number of different?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been designed for LMICs, and the reason we did that was because that provided us with the strictest set of specifications that we could get. So that if we then went back and rolled it out through the NHS, the specifications are through the roof for its use case there. For instance, each device has a battery on it, so it can run half a day's worth of tests on a battery if there's a power outage. It's got surge protection for LMIC, so if there's electrical surges, it's protected against it. We've got dust management. We can run it in different ambient temperatures, different humidities. All of this means that it's a highly robust system. And the whole idea was that I could throw it in my backpack and run out into the field or into townships and do testing, and that's allowed us to do that. So when you transfer that into the NHS now, you can have these on trolleys running around in A&E, people being tested quickly, in ambulance, test quickly before you get to A&E, and that sort of thing. Really important stuff that's robust, rapid, and can do lots of different things as well.
For many people that have never developed a product, how hard is it to come up with that concept, actually go through that journey of building the team that you have at Quantum, and then actually taking that through the market access into the NHS?
Yeah, coming up with the concept is easy. Okay. That's a dream. At the end of the day, everybody can dream. This is, I want a Ferrari. That's okay, great. That's my dream. Now I have to make it happen. That's the hard bit. And there's hard bit for several reasons. First, obviously, technologically. As you're working through it, there's certain things that you start to realize you can have one but not two. You can have one, you definitely can't have the other, and you've got to start looking at honing your specifications, having small deviations and that sort of thing. And that's difficult when you want a Ferrari and you end up with a Porsche. It's still a Porsche, but you really wanted the Ferrari, because I wanted this to do sequencing as well. We haven't quite got there yet, but maybe in the future. So that was my Ferrari, the ability to do sequencing. We'll get there one day.
And what about you as a CEO, kind of managing that team? Because you haven't just got scientists in here, you've got mechanical engineers, you've got software engineers, but that blend of skills is quite tricky to pull together. How have you found that journey?
Oh yeah, I mean that's fun. Dealing with lots of different disciplines and their personalities is interesting. But we have a work hard, play harder attitude here at QuantumDX. We very much do feel like a family, and we've got WhatsApp groups that we're together. We have Slack. We have parties and all that sort of stuff, and that's all important to bring people from different disciplines together because they've got different outlook on life and they think about things differently. And to get them all working together, it needs extracurricular activities and lots of talking. So we're social media up to the hilt. We've got, like I said, Slack and everything like that. So everybody's constantly talking. We have town hall meetings all the time where we roll out the beers and the wine and all that sort of stuff. We organize what we call Sci-Fest. So Sci-Fest is, I think it's every quarter we get together and everybody presents something that they're doing. And we ask questions, and we enjoy it, and then we all get drunk. Proper startup stuff that you would expect. And then, from my perspective, a lot of what I do is listening and talking and dealing with the issues as they're going on. What I found, fortunately, is over time, that starts to self-regulate. People get to understand, that it's more important to get on than it is to argue, because we've got strict deadlines that we need to hit and get on with it. And I think, so I think the hardest thing for me as a CEO is working with the board and the shareholders in terms of getting them to fully understand what the challenges are in this development. That it's not a linear A to B. It's A to Z to B to C. And you do dart over, because once you fix something, that may impact something else. And in getting the shareholders and the board along on the ride, understanding that this is a highly complex device and it's not going to be, a linear thing. That's tricky. That's very tricky.
But many people don't appreciate how hard it is to launch a product business, and those early years of funding. How did you manage to finance your early operation?
Well, I was very fortunate that I wasn't CEO at the beginning. I was the Chief Scientific Officer. My co-founder, Elaine Warburton, was CEO. And she could raise money in a desert. She is incredible when it comes to that. So I was very fortunate in the early days that she could. She was doing amazing things in terms of not just raising money from angels, friends and family, her own husband, for the love of God. The poor guy got a big payout, and she managed to convince him to put it all into quantum. And then also through grants. I remember in the early days, Elaine and I used to spend nights and weekends just writing grants, literally on the phone to each other back and forth as we're editing these things. And we got very successful at that. And so very much, thanks to the government support in supporting startups, we were able to really develop and get to a point that we can start attracting much bigger checks from more professional investors, which is where we are now.
And given your time with the journey, both with the funding and the products, given your time again, could there have been things you would do differently if you had the opportunity to do the journey again?
I think we probably would have focused on less investors. We've got quite a healthy roster of investors at the moment, and it probably would have been better if we looked at a few large investors that we could have taken on the journey. But that wasn't to be the case for us. Diagnostics, as you know, is very difficult to understand. Venture capital are supposed to take risks. In this country, they don't take risks. They're very risk averse. And so diagnostics is tricky. And I can fully understand why. It's hard to fully understand which one of the many boxes around the world will make it and which one will win. And the only way that they can really understand that is through independent clinical data and commercial traction. Both of which we've only got this year. And before that, they tend to wait. And what we found is that slipping into the higher risk investment area is not institutional investors, but family offices, and they are really and super angels and that sort of thing. They're really filling that void where once the venture capitalists sat.
Because we definitely know that when we work with some of our other tech companies, we'll find the ultra high net worths will invest more for the love of the technology at times, not just purely for the return because of the greater good. But that must really resonate the product with and the application of how it can help so many people. That must be quite easy, is it not, to bring on new investors? Or
I wouldn't say it's easy.
Okay.
I definitely wouldn't say it's easy. And the family offices and high and super angels are definitely getting more and more sophisticated, and they do their research. So it's certainly not easy, but it is easier because their investment cycles are a lot more flexible. With venture capital, a 3 to 5 year return on investment is a requirement. That's very difficult to predict when you're in development. But with super high net worths and with the family offices, they want to be along for the journey. Yeah, and a lot of them look at it as legacy investments or philanthropy, and don't necessarily think along the same lines as a venture capitalist does. If it resonates with them, they're in. If it doesn't, they're out. But they're certainly not out if they don't get a return in the 3 to 5 year timeline. They can be in it for longer.
And 2020 was a bit of a shocker for most people, apart from life science companies. Obviously, we saw the great releases with QuantumDX. Was 2020 a good year in terms of QPOC and obviously what was going on around us in terms of the release?
Yeah, well, COVID sent a rocket up our arse, that's for sure. Made us go from 0 to hero very, very quickly. We were probably about 18 months to 2 years away from launch, and we launched from April to in less than 12 months. And that's not just launch, that is scale manufacturing to a huge capacity, both of the device and the cassettes. We've got multiple manufacturing lines in 3 different countries now. We've hit a scale that's just mind-boggling. We've done a 600 patient trial with the NHS. It shows great sensitivity and specificity. And we've got the device out. It's been a roller coaster. Now, these people here in the office have been working night and day and weekends for 12 months.
And it's interesting because this is not the first time I've heard this story, as in 2020 seemed to accelerate significantly just the rate of both that innovation, but the rate at which you can commercialize, system integrate a product. Clearly, you can't work your stuff like that forever. There's a finite period on that, but it was a good experience in terms of being able to advance that schedule of works. Yeah, I mean,
I've been fascinated by Silicon Valley startup companies, and the stories that you hear about them. They work burning the midnight oil, working weekends, just get their code in and all of that. And we people literally living in the office. We did all of that for a year. I mean, the amount of time I've spent in this office has been incredible. We've all mucked in, we've all done our own bit, and we've all helped, and it's really brought us closer together as a team. And we're a very tight-knit team now. We'd like to help each other out, and we all get on well. So it's been one hell of a ride. And at the end of it, we've now got QPOC at scale, which is really exciting for UK PLC. Really exciting. This normally what happens is it gets picked off by an American company, and we lose that. But because of the support through COVID, we don't necessarily have to lose this.
So where are you manufacturing the product now, and how many units are coming through annually?
So QPOC we're manufacturing in Felixstowe with our partners Cogent. So UK built, which is great for UK PLC. We could do 800 devices a month based upon orders. So the capacity is there to go absolutely gangbusters. We've got a test disposable line in Copenhagen and another one in Singapore, which has been really interesting, setting these things up and not being able to go to Singapore. So our manufacturing team has done absolute wonders in doing that remotely.
And how hard did you find that, the transition of actually designing and developing the product in-house to then passing it out to an outsourced manufacturing?
Oh, well, from my perspective, it seemed like it went extremely smoothly. There were a few things that we needed to tweak here and there, but it seemed to go really smoothly. And I think that is testament to the fact that we brought on really top-class people. Our VP of manufacturing, Andy Whittle, he's been there, seen it, done it. I'm sure he wouldn't say it was easy, but he made it look easy. That just speaks to his professionalism and his ability in manufacturing and the experience that he has. And that's now what we're looking for at Quantum is people with that level of experience of being there, seen it, and done it, and can then take us to that next level.
And what are your plans for Quantum generally in terms of both the headcount here at Newcastle and in terms of international expansion? If I'm sat here in 10 years' time, what will QuantumDX look like?
Yeah, well, in 10 years' time, who knows? Who knows? Yeah, we may have a few more boxes. We've got one that's just about to go into product development as well. So yeah, that's exciting. In terms of our plans, immediate plans, we're expanding our commercial teams massively. We're starting hiring internationally as well. We hired a couple of people in Spain, and one in France soon, and we're building out a distribution network as well. So we're right at the start of that, and that's is now really starting to take off. We're also with our technical teams, we're transitioning them from this kind of R&D development into the more tech support for the sales. And like I said, we have this other box which is even better than QPOC that will be coming through. Not a molecular technology, but it's a cell capture for sepsis and tuberculosis. So yeah, the future's pretty rosy. Yeah, 10 years time, where will we be? I don't know. We'll be bigger than Cepheid.
Brilliant. And how are your competitors responding to this product? Because when you launch anything that's clever, and I would expect this has got numerous patents on it in terms of protecting the IP, but are your competitors in the wings already trying to copy your ideas?
I don't know if they're trying to copy them. I think they're keeping a watching brief on us to see what we're going to do and understand where we go in terms of our commercial traction when we actually get out there with our CE marks later this year. My inbox is filled with other companies wanting to take a look at QuantumDX for various reasons, whether that's partnerships or strategic investments or whatever. So we're very popular at the moment. We're the hot girl in the disco.
It's a very good analogy. And you've always been a very collaborative business. You've always opened yourself out to NGOs and other pharma businesses. But how do you get that balance right of collaborating, but not allowing people to come in and just rip off all your ideas?
Well, IP, first of all, strict non-disclosure agreements and contracts that prevent them from doing it. But even then, people will still try and rip you off. This device has taken a lot of work, and there's a lot of know-how on top of the IP. So it will take somebody years to rip this off, and it will be very, very difficult. But we're an open and collaborative company, and what we want to do is to work with companies such as SpeedX in Sydney, Australia. We're working with them on a number of different assays. We've just won a grant with them as well to put their assays onto our platform. And we're working with other companies as well, which I can't talk about at the moment, but I'm sure it'll be announced soon, who are also looking at putting their assay content onto QPOC. The idea here is a box doing a single test is not that attractive. What you need is a box doing multiple tests. So expanding our menu makes QPOC more attractive. And we're a small company from the northeast of England. We don't have the capacity to develop lots of assays and get them through regulatory, but our partners do. And so we've identified a long list of partners who have assay content, but don't have a point of care box, who do want to get to the point of care. And we're working with all of them. And I think that strategy is going to really help us differentiate ourselves in the marketplace. I mean, we can do a 30-minute sample to 70-plex assay. And no one else can do that. And when we add content to it, it's going to make it all that better.
Mm-hmm. We talked before about like 10 years on with a business. If we were to try and put a number on the impact of people's lives at the end of this, how many lives could be saved with a product like yours?
Yeah, so if we do get this device into low to middle income countries and have it impacting, for instance, so let's just take one disease, tuberculosis. 10 million people get tuberculosis every year. About a tenth of them have drug-resistant TB. To diagnose TB properly, it would take 3 months. To diagnose drug-resistant TB, it will take up to 5 months. Generally, people are going to die and pass it on. Mm-hmm. what we can do with QPOC is we can diagnose it and determine the drug resistance in 30 minutes. That means you can initiate patients on the right therapeutic immediately. We've also got an assay that can predict if a patient will get active TB. So that will then allow us to prophylactically treat before they start passing on, before they start coughing. So in that one disease area, we've got two assays that could potentially reduce the burden of TB globally. So that's 10 million people a year. Now, if you extrapolate that out to other diseases, I mean, the impact could be huge. I mean, we firmly believe that prevention is better than cure. So if we prevent somebody from developing active TB, they're not going to pass it on. And so it's thinking like this, thinking outside of the box, thinking about how we can impact different pathways that will make the big difference. So yeah, millions of people.
I think that's just truly wonderful. And I guess working in a team, which is developing technology that can save lives. I mean, I know there's other businesses doing that, but it's truly wonderful in terms of the end goal of where the technology is going. I've once heard you talk about the Internet of Life and data points and cloud. How has all that progressed alongside the development of QPOC?
Yeah, so QPOC's got an antenna on it. It's got the chipset that allows you to send data via hardwire with a USB cable, with Bluetooth, with over the Wi-Fi, 2G, 3G, 4G. It is highly connected. And we've got great grand ideas about developing dashboards so that you can then send anonymized and geostamped data into the cloud, because these things are going to be on the back of trucks, for instance. So they're going to be on the back of mopeds and running around. And what you want to be able to do is send all of that data into the cloud. So you're tracking real time the emergence of an pandemic or something like that. But what I was really interested in is using it for smart antimicrobial stewardship. So again, we'll go back to South Africa because this is where all of these ideas came from. For instance, if we are doing a drug resistant or drug resistant marker screen of tuberculosis on patients in Cape Town and Durban, and you start seeing a lot of positive patients that have got drug resistance for all first-line therapies, then you know that in Durban, you need to ensure that the second-line therapies are there. Whereas in Cape Town, you're not seeing that. You can just stay with the first-line therapies. And they're big cities. Now, if you're thinking about taking that out into the rural areas, that's going to be really important, because in the rural areas, you're going to have a small clinic. It may or may not have electricity. You certainly won't have a fridge. And you want to be able to know what drugs should be there, because if you've got somebody who's got drug-resistant TB, they will then have to go into Durban to get their drugs. But if you're beaming all this stuff up, you know that you need to get the drugs to them. And that changes everything. And I think that this patient-centric view of the world, making it easier for them, will make it easier for us to start controlling these diseases.
It's interesting, isn't it? You know, back in the day when you're talking about Cape Town, you know, you would never have known that cloud technology would have grown at the rate that it has done. And actually those things in parallel to actually being able to get all those data points and, you know, those predicted behaviors and actually the number of data scientists and analysts that we recruit as a business now, that it's such a different world compared to 10 years ago.
No, it absolutely is. So, yeah. But interestingly, even 10 years ago, and this is how sophisticated the scientists are back in South Africa, they were already thinking about this stuff. And they were networking gene experts, albeit only in the lab and not using geostamping, but they were networking. And it was just fascinating, because they were then able to look at a dashboard at any one time and know how many people are testing positive for rifampicin resistant TB at any one time. And when you think about that, I mean, that's incredible. And it was just a small leap then to think, well, if these are actually going out and you just geostamp it, then you've got a really accurate idea of the dynamics of these infections.
Oh, completely. And just coming back to 2020 and linking that to the wider kind of pharmaceutical industry, do you think with antibiotics and do you think we're going to see a more increased investment in antibiotics and development from these larger drug companies over the next few years, given what we've seen over the last year of 2020?
I think there's going to be more funding available.
Okay.
I think the business models need to be addressed. because they're not quite there yet. I don't fully understand how a pharmaceutical company can get a return on investment from developing a new anti-infective. Now, there's lots of people out there, John Rex, for instance, and Dame Sally Davis, who are working on lobbying for different business models, whether that is pharmaceutical companies get a prize at the end of it. So if they get to market, they get £1 billion or something like that, which will incentivize them to do the development, or whether or not there is a patent extension, which will allow them to get a return on the investment over a longer period of time, or other business models. But something has to happen to because they're businesses. I mean, at the end of the day, the bottom line needs to look healthy. And if you're throwing 10 billion into an anti-infective and you're only going to make $1 billion at the end of it, it's just that they're not going to do it. So that needs to be addressed. But that's, there are smarter people than me working on that.
And do you find that you're listened to, because you must have you talk about your end customer, you've got intimate knowledge of the demand for your product and how that links in with obviously the treatment of infectious diseases. Do you feel as though you have the ear of government if you want to add value to what's actually going on the ground?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I could definitely speak to people in the government, the Department of Health, about all this sort of stuff, which is great. But at the end of the day, it's the fundamental economics of infectious disease treatment and diagnosis are they're tricky at best. When you think about a treating clinician, they've got a £5 anti-infective therapy, and they have to run a £30 test to decide whether or not they're going to use it or not. They're going to give it because they just do. That's just the way it is. That needs to change. We need government to lead from the front and say, you can't prescribe a drug unless you've had a companion diagnostic, unless you know that what you're about to give will work. But it's tricky because the value of diagnostics is not readily seen in hospitals and in government and all that sort of stuff. What I hope now, thanks to COVID, is that it has changed. We suddenly have started to see that diagnostics is going to be important, and not just for COVID, but for everything. So yeah, fingers crossed that keeps going. Although the media seems to have dropped the whole diagnostic piece and is focused on the vaccines. But once the Indian variant hits these shores, they will soon change their tune.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and thinking as time goes on, what could other businesses or people do to support a business like QuantumDX?
Well, they could buy QPOX.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So that's the hospitals with the NHS?
So hospitals, any business. I mean, lateral flows are great technologies when used right. And the right use case for lateral flows is when there's a high prevalence of an infectious disease within a pandemic, where you want to start cutting down the number of positive patients, stopping that chain of transmission bit by bit. But when you're at low prevalence like we are now, they're next to useless, absolutely pointless. So what you actually need is PCR, because PCR is more sensitive. And so you're able to pick up those rare cases earlier. And so when you're in an office building, for instance, if you're go and having a board meeting where there's lots of heated debate and everybody's shouting and you're in a closed room, do you really want to rely on a lateral flow test? Or do you want something that's more definitive like PCR? So for us, we see a big market in that kind of thing. And obviously schools, travel industry, et cetera, et cetera.
And what about wider investors, NGOs? Do you need any more support from, or distributors? Is there anyone else you need from the wider community to increase the growth of your business? Yeah,
like I said, we're building a distribution network at the moment. So we're talking with lots of distributors throughout the world. So that's going to be very important for our next phase. Mm-hmm. In terms of investment, we're looking both at strategic investment as well as more institutional investors at this moment in time. We've got to that point where the risk is off the table from a technical perspective and very soon from a commercial perspective. So institutional investors will be more interested in investing us to help us scale. Mm-hmm. And so that will be the next thing for us. But yeah, I mean, other than that, we're pretty, we feel home free right now. It's in a very good position.
Absolutely. You can tell that from everything, the team building, obviously, all the wonderful things we see that's released. And so it's a really exciting journey. Tell me, Jonathan, if we weren't sat here chatting about QPOC and all the skills that you've gained over your experience, and obviously you're very humble about talking about your strengths and weaknesses, what skills do you have now that would lend themselves to other businesses? I.e., if you weren't doing QuantumDX, what else would you be doing in life?
I'd be a bum. This is all I can do.
That's interesting, but
I do, mainly because this is all I want to do.
Okay.
I have a very I got a very strict view of the world, and I hate doing stuff that I don't like doing. So football didn't work out for me, but genetics has. So I would be building a box or building a assay, and it would be in science, and I would not be doing anything else.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan, you've got a fantastic business here with QuantumDX. I'm very excited to see how it's all going to play out over the next few years, and I look forward to meeting again in due course. But Jonathan, thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.